Hey, so I got a comment on the PCG Discord from someone who wanted some tips on how to make a PCG combat system. Here's the comment. It would really mean a lot to me if you made a video about how to make a combat system in your PCGs, because I'm really struggling and you did a great job with it in your Zubat game. So thanks so much, PDY. I'd be happy to talk about that. Here we go, folk. So first and foremost, and this is the most important tip I'm going to say today, don't do it. It's a trap. Combat systems in PCGs, not a good idea. Don't do it. Now, if you're watching this thinking, oh, like this is just going to be a rant on why they shouldn't do it, I will rant about that. But don't worry, I'm also going to give you some tips on how to actually make a combat system, so keep watching. We will get to that. But I first want to tell you why, it's probably not a good idea in most cases. It's something that I've had a lot of trouble with. So let's get into it. So there have been various attempts to make combat systems in paper computer games going all the way back to the very beginning when we were little kids. They were, just every now and then. Most PCGs don't have them, and there's a reason for that. Like, when we were little kids, when Chris started taking karate, that was the first time he tried to introduce a combat system into paper computer games. It was, he started a series of PCGs called the Karate series, where I had to learn karate and use actual karate moves to, fight enemies. And it didn't really work out, because he would put moves like slam, tackle, chop, actual karate moves, and they had pre-measured effects, and somehow that made the games less fun than what normal PCGs were at the time. Because the fun of a paper computer game is that sense of freedom, that sense that you can try anything or do anything, and the results are going to be there. I mean, always in any normal paper computer game, there's always enemies. You always have to fight enemies, but normally you would fight an enemy by just saying what you're going to try to do, and what happens just sort of makes sense in the situation. So that's sort of usually the combat system. Like, for example, I'm fighting a villain, I'll say like, well, what if I try to kick his legs out from under him? Chris might say, yeah, but his legs are really strong and muscly, so that doesn't work. He repels your attack and grabs you and kills you or whatever. So it would be more just based on trying things, and you could try anything, and there was a sense of freedom and adventure to it. But when he started making the karate games, it became sort of more regimented, like each move had to do one thing, and it sort of took away from that sense of freedom of paper computer games, because now you can't try anything anymore. You can only try these particular moves. Many years later, when I was making my PCG Balzac Lobotron, which, by the way, biggest PCG ever made, I'm pretty sure. Even knowing all of this, I tried to put in a combat system again, because in Balzac Lobotron you have a ship, and every now and then you're going to be confronted by enemy starships, and you have to fight them. I put in a simple combat system. It's just, okay, you have lasers and you have torpedoes. Each one deals a certain amount of damage. The enemy ships have a certain amount of shields and a certain amount of health. And I thought, okay, I know all those problems from before, but I'll only do that in space battles and it'll be okay, right? And it was sort of okay, but it's not as easy as you think, because then it's like, well, hold on, how much can a ship move in a turn, right? Because that's the sort of thing I didn't think of when I was making the game, because Chris, who was playing it, he would say okay, I'll fly over to this asteroid and duck behind it and shoot from there. And I'm like, okay, well, I don't know, does the enemy ship have time to shoot you while you're on your way there? And the more you get into it, the more you think about it, the more you work on it, the more this becomes sort of like a full combat system, sort of like what they have in Dungeons and Dragons or something like that, which is fine. But the thing is that the combat system they have in Dungeons and Dragons is very complex. It's very well thought out. It's more than I can sort of do. So it was like when I was making that combat system, it was sort of a constant struggle to keep, to find a balance, because you're trying to keep this a paper computer game, keep it simple so that you can focus on the story and the adventure, but also like have a combat system that makes sense and feels satisfying. And it's very difficult to balance that. Also in Balzac Globotron, you can take over enemy ships. So Chris would eventually start to build up a whole fleet of starships. And when he had enough of them, like the battles just became unwieldy. It's like, okay, I've got 150 ships and they're all shooting at things, and the enemies also have 150 ships. That's just way too much health and shields to keep track of. So it ended up being a mess. And after that experience, I was like, I thought back to the karate games, and I was like, this whole combat system thing, it was a bad idea. I shouldn't have done it. And then after that, I did it again. Because apparently, I don't learn from my experiences. So after that, I made Zuvak, the life and times of a clown on a stick. And this was going to be a different thing. And, I was thinking, okay, I know combat systems are a bad idea, but maybe I could do it a little bit different, Maybe I could do it so that it's more compatible with the idea of paper computer games. Make it, fit in better, make more sense. And, make it in such a way so that I don't have to worry about numbers as much. That was a good idea. So, of course, this is the combat system that I was asked about. But this combat system, I thought, hey, basically, Zuvak is going to be, Zuvak, the life and times of a clown on a stick, is going to be a different kind of paper computer game than has ever been made before. Zuvak doesn't really physically walk around or pick up things as much. He's exploring the internet with his mind. He can, and he'll have a town, and he can look down at it through a satellite image, which he can hack into, and he can make phone calls to the people in the houses that he sees, or he can order deliveries to their house or whatever, but he can't physically go there. So that changes things. And I figured I would have a combat system where he has to fight against viruses on the internet. I thought that would make sense, and I would do it without numbers. That was my goal. I wanted to make a combat system that did not have any numbers, because after Balzac Globotron, I didn't want to deal with numbers anymore. And also, I thought that would give it a more original and interesting kind of combat system, and it did to some extent. I mean, what I came up with is that enemies. Enemy creatures, enemy viruses basically, would be made out of these pieces, which I called units, short for algorithmic unit. And the idea was that each unit does something. You've got your little weapon units basically, and your little shield units, and the whole entity could turn so that its units, so that its weapons were facing the enemy. There's no numbers, so if you shoot something, it dies in one hit. Now the entity you're fighting is different. Now it doesn't have that weapon anymore, so that way you're fighting, and it's a combat system, but it's not based on numbers. So that made it easier. The thing about this is, while that was a good idea, it was a much better sort of a combat system. It was interesting, it was original, it was unique, and I liked a lot of things about it, but you still run into a lot of the same issues, how much can your unit turn in a turn? It's hard to keep track of it. There's a lot of little moving pieces. When you start making this, it always seems easier when you first think of it than when you're actually doing it. When you're actually doing it, there's still just way too many moving pieces to keep track of. It's a mess. And when I was actually playing the game, a lot of the time I found that, I would be having more fun with this if there just was no combat system. Just no combat. Just get rid of those parts of the game and do the other parts of the game. Like, the thing is, like, it would have been fine if I had, like, a partner, if I had, like, somebody else to do that, the combat system for me. Like, if I had somebody who's, like, exclusively just working on the combat system, making it really strong and really good, and fit in really well with the paper computer game mechanics, yeah, probably would have worked out pretty well. I mean, the way I did it worked out okay, but I mean, it's a lot of work, you guys. It is a lot of work. Don't kid yourself about that. Making a really good combat system takes a lot of time and effort. That's why, like, Dungeons and Dragons, you know, they hire a team to make their combat system and to make sure it makes a lot of sense, is usable, and that when you're playing with it, you're gonna have a certain sense of satisfaction, because you need more than one person. Like, you need people to design it, to debate every feature, to play test it, to make sure that, you know, it works. Like, when I first designed my thing, I had a friend, Ari, hang out with me, and we play tested the system, and he just immediately discovered all sorts of things that I hadn't thought of, and that just made it too easy. Like, he would be like, okay, if it's like this, I can just do this and win automatically, you know? And I'm like, oh, well, better change that. So I do, and then we try it again, and he finds another thing that breaks it completely. So it is not easy to make a combat system. Do not think it's easy to do that. And making the rest of the paper computer game takes so much time and effort. Like, dude, you guys, when I say I don't say that lightly, but it is a trap. Don't do it. Like, just don't do it. It's, you know, your paper computer game is going to be a lot, like, you're going to get more out, you're going to have more fun with them if you just stick to the basic paper computer game mechanism. And the thing is, like, in a lot of ways, that's better anyway. You know, like I've found you kind of don't want paper computer games to turn into Dungeons and Dragons. I mean, there's already so many good role-playing games out there. Like, I don't want PCGs to try to be that, to try to compete with that. There's already a lot of really good, like, tabletop role-playing games in that space, and I can't do any better than those. Paper computer games have their own unique thing. There's a unique kind of fun with where you can try to deal with enemies in lots of different creative ways. You know, I'll try hitting him over the head with a pan. Oh yeah, well, he blocks it. Okay, save game. I'll try distracting him by talking to him and then, you know, rolling under his legs and getting past him. You know, like, the fact that you have so many, like, you have infinite options, like, is what makes paper computer games so unique and so interesting. It makes it its own kind of game that's worth playing, different from D&D. D&D is good in its own way. I'm not putting down D&D. I'm a big fan of D&D, don't get me wrong. Combat, the more you make of a combat system, the more watered down it becomes as a paper computer game. And, like, there's less PCG fun to it. It becomes more like something else. Now, that being said, if what you want is still a combat system, maybe you want some features of a paper computer game, but you don't want it to be 100% PCG, that's totally fine. I mean, there's no limit on what you can do. So, one thing I would recommend is just, you know, copying a combat system. You're welcome to use my combat system from Zuvac, The Life and Times of a Clown on a Stick, or any of my other combat systems from many of my other PCGs. But here's a few tips. Number 1, use as few numbers as possible. Numbers are hard to keep track of. You have to write down a million things on a piece of paper. You don't want to be doing that. That takes a lot of time. And the more numbers you have to worry about, the harder it is to actually play this game. So try to make your combat system as simple as you possibly can, as few numbers as you possibly can. That was my goal with Zuvac. It has no numbers in it, and yet it's still too complicated somehow. Number 2, try and make your combat system fit in with the paper computer game mechanics. Make sure that it's okay for them to save game. It's okay for them to try something different. Like, try to make your combat system work in with that. For example, like, maybe I'm, you know, if we're soldiers and we're at war, I can still say, okay, if I shoot somebody, it does 10 points of damage, right? And I can shoot twice per turn. Okay, but I can also incorporate some PCG stuff into that. For example, like I can make it so they can still try, you know, shooting his feet instead of shooting, you know, and like knocking him over, or like shooting something above him and knocking it onto him. Try and like work all the, you know, that PCG stuff into it. Like, you want to limit your players' freedom as little as possible. The more freedom they have, the more fun the game is going to be for them. Number 3, make your combat system fit with the character. Like my Zuvak is the perfect example of this, because he's in the digital world and he's fighting digital organisms, so it makes sense with him as a character. If I made a combat system for Zuvak where it was just, oh, you hit him and it deals 10 damage, that's boring. If I had done that, there would have been no point. It would have been better to just not have a combat system at all. Whereas the combat system I did use in Zuvak, at least it fits with Zuvak, it makes sense with him, and it reveals something new about him. Like, you get by playing with this combat system, you get a sense of what it's like to be Zuvak. You learn more about Zuvak. Before you played my game, you might not have thought that Zuvak's flying through the internet fighting these algorithmic entities and, you know, like deleting pieces of them and things like that. But when you play this, you're like, oh, whoa, you know, like, so that's what it's like to be this guy. Like, it puts you in the experience of being Zuvak. And it makes it a unique experience. That makes it fun. There's all sorts of different variations of that. Like, if you're going to make a PCG about a slime monster, maybe build a combat system where, you know, when he absorbs something, you know, pieces of him grow or something. I don't know. Just base it around what that character is. And if you can do that, that makes it worth having a combat system in the first place. But still don't do it. It's still a trap. See, here's the thing. Like, after Zuvak, there have been a bunch of times where I had ideas for PCGs with combat systems, and I have finally learned my lesson. I was like, you know what? No, I'm not doing it. And every time I have one of those ideas, I'm like, okay, well, could I make that PCG without a combat system? Is there a way I could find a way around that? And I think about it, and there usually is. There usually is. You don't really need a combat system. Just don't do it, folks. It's a trap. But if you do it, follow those steps. Be as simple as possible, as few numbers as possible. Make it relate to the character. Make it relate to the story and the game. And that'll make it engaging. But again, no matter what you do, it is going to be way too complex. You are not going to be able to deal with it on your own. Every combat system you've ever played has been made by a team of developers who know what they're doing and are mainly focused on, like, if you were only focused on the combat system, that might be fine. But especially if you're only going to use this combat system for one game, don't do it. It's a trap. It's a trap. So yeah, that's all I've got for you today, folks. Thanks for watching, and stay safe.